Are you looking to become a Mensch? Welcome to the Mensch Podcast, the show that guides and inspires Jewish youth and turns them into change makers. We talk a lot on this show about finding your purpose, discovering what you uniquely have to offer the world, and then giving it all you've got. But what does it look like when someone takes a lifetime of professional expertise and channels it directly into serving their community? Our guest today has done exactly that. Dr. Rebecca Mannis is a renowned learning specialist and founder of Ivy Prep Learning Center in New York City. She holds a PhD in developmental psychology from Teachers College, Columbia University, with a specialization in neuroscience and education, as well as a master's degree in reading, language, and learning disabilities from Harvard Graduate School of Education. Over 35 years, she has worked with students ranging from preschoolers to graduate students, helping individuals of all learning styles unlock their potential. Her work is grounded in a simple but powerful belief. Every child learns differently, and every child deserves a pathway to success. Through individualized learning plans, educational evaluations, and family guidance, she has helped countless students navigate challenges and achieve their goals. But Dr. Rebecca Mannis hasn't confined that expertise to her private practices. She previously coordinated educational services for the Making Headway Foundation, a nonprofit supporting children with brain and spinal cord tumors, and has worked extensively with Jewish day schools on curriculum development, inclusion, and support for students with learning differences. Her efforts have helped schools build stronger resource programs, train faculty, and create environments where every student can succeed. She is also, by her own description, a proud Jewish mother, someone who understands both professionally and personally what it means to help young people grow, learn, and find their place in the world. Today, we'll explore what it means to build a life at the intersection of science, service, and Jewish values, and what that journey can teach the next generation about what it truly means to be a Mensch. Dr. Rebecca Mannis to the podcast.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, let's jump right in. So a little bit into your background. You've spent over 30 years helping kids with learning differences and gifted kids. So what drew you to that work originally, and what keeps you in it?
Great question. My mom, who turns 94 at the end of the month, is an educator. She started a daycare program for children whose parents work so that they could get high quality care. So I was always volunteering and around children, and having grown up in the camp movement, knew that I wanted to do something with kids, but I didn't think I wanted to be a classroom teacher. There were psychologists who did the sort of testing, which I ultimately was trained to do, who would come to my mom's daycare program so that they could see kids in action and also be guides to the teachers so that there could be good collaboration. So I was really privileged to be able to volunteer as a college student and see these people who were so passionate in action. So based on that experience and their giving me excellent insight, I ended up with my practice. They told me, Rebecca, we know how to understand why a person might have E or difficulty reading, but we're not teachers. We don't know what to do about it. We really suggest that you spend some time learning how to intervene. And so I spent some time studying before I did my PhD. I spent here at Harvard's Grad School of Education with Professor Jean Chall, who was the foremost reading researcher at the time, learning from her, and found that I really loved bridging those areas.
I think that's really beautiful, and your story seems deeply inspiring to anyone listening. And one thing I wonder is, how has your work maybe changed over the last 30 years? You mentioned that your mom, I think, was in the same field. So how have you seen the work change, and what do you think is going to change in the future, even with the rise of AI?
It's changed because the tools that we use, both to understand how a person learns and also to intervene have become that much more specific. For example, now we've had an opportunity to follow kids who started off having, let's say, some reading difficulty. And we've seen that when they're given certain methods of instruction and supported, frankly, when they're sometimes using AI tools, for example, to take notes more effectively, that helps them just grow that much more. And certainly technologies such as brain technology, scanning technology that helps us understand how the brain grows has changed. What hasn't changed is that our focus always needs to be on the individual, on kids, and on the people who care for them the most. Their parents foremost, and of course their teachers and their mentors. And that stays the same regardless.
Yeah, I can't help but think how this job seems very rewarding, when I think about it, because you're working with these, kids who maybe have some difficulties, but then once you really work with them, they can really show their full potential and their full talents. And I think that's a really rewarding job for you to have. And you also, you work at this intersection, this very interesting intersection of neuroscience and education. To many people, that might sound rather clinical or unconventional. How do you personalize this job, and how do you make it more warm and more like a personalized connection with the kids and students you work with, rather than like a clinical or like a doctor connection?
Now, it's very interesting that you say that. The truth is that neuropsychologists, and that's the field that I trained in for my PhD, are really trained to administer these tests that have been standardized, right? They've given them to thousands of people to truly see how the tools can work and how people grow over time. And so there are quite a few rules and, let's say, parameters, frameworks for how you administer those tests and interpret them. I'll tell you the truth, originally, that's what I thought I would mainly be doing, and that I would just appreciate those different methods of intervention. I actually found that as I was training in that area, I kept wanting to almost give the little kids hints. I was noticing that there were some methods, and I was so tempted to say, look how you figured out. You talked to yourself and coached yourself how to put those blocks in order to recognize this design and replicate it. And so I guess some of it is our own personality, our knowing what it is about ourselves. And I would say we had the privilege of speaking a bit yesterday. Clearly, the two of you are people who are very thoughtful. You're problem solvers. You know information, but you're also so tactical in your critical thinking and how you draw ideas together and frame them. And I think that's really what helps all of us figure out what kind of juices us up and how we can contribute to society in our unique way.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you so much for the compliment. I mean, we really appreciate it. And I think what you said is very interesting. And I'm also wondering how this kind of lens you have of approaching with your students, and you mentioned like kind of solving a puzzle and giving them hints, and mainly like your principles within teaching. I know you're very grounded with your Jewish values. So my question is, how does your teaching style and your career, how have Jewish values and your Jewish identity played a big part in that, and how are they the foundation to it?
Yeah, I think that's something that shapes a great deal of who I am. While, of course, I'm also recognizing that's how I choose to live my life. So I welcome the opportunity to engage with people from all different perspectives. And the trick is to make sure that we're respectful and, of course, be our own people and respect other people as well. Having said that, it very much shapes me. My dad, who unfortunately passed away, was himself a person whose family could not afford to send him to Jewish day school. And we don't know who it was, but somebody donated the money for my dad's tuition because they knew that it was important to his parents. And really, it's because my dad had that opportunity that my older brothers and I had the opportunity for the depth of learning and family experience that we had. So I think one part of it is that I appreciate that people have their own value system, regardless of whether they're mine, and that they come to their experience and their priorities from the totality of the background and the inputs that they've had. I would say that another way that it shapes it is that Judaism and Jewish learning is about having depth of knowledge, also critical thinking, knowing the information, being able to step back and look at different perspectives. And that's something that I really value in how I teach. After all, I'm often working with students one-on-one, say after school, or helping them with test prep for the ACT or the SAT. I might have a certain perspective that might be very different from their chem teacher or from the person who did the testing, or frankly, from their parents, right? I might see that it takes a student a lot of time in order to learn certain content till they've really got it. And parents may say, I'll talk basketball a little because in New York, we're focused on the Knicks right now. I've had parents who've said to me, you know what, when my kid has a basketball in his hands and I'm quizzing him and he's moving it around, it's totally a different thing. And he's able to process the information and memorize it at a much faster pace. So a lot of the Jewish experience is having substantial knowledge, but being able to also take a broader worldview and appreciate those different inputs.
Yeah, I think I've really definitely seen that between me and Mark when we were also as well studying for the SAT. I know Mark.
It's that time of the year.
Yeah. Mark, I think, really likes using textbooks, and I think he prefers, doing it a lot by himself, whereas I can't really study myself. I don't have the motivation to start. And I really like having someone else just even being present around me, so I can just ask questions and keep it engaging for myself to keep me on task and studying. So I think it really means, or it's not, I think it's really influential to understand what method really works best for you. And I think teenagers really need to just experience all the various forms of studying before they know what best works for them.
I totally agree with you. And I'll also just add that you're saying something, your insights really are your real-time version of what I often think, which is that this whole college process, it's not necessarily about where you get in, although of course I wish you to have the admit for the schools that you aspire to, but it's more using the college process to develop an understanding of who you are. We call that metacognitive awareness, really developing that self-awareness, because then not only will you be successful with your immediate goal, but getting a little wonky neuroscience here, it also contributes to what we call transfer of training. Those insights get laid down as organizational and planning tracts in the front part of our brain, and you can then use that when you're actually in school, in college.
Yeah, just building off that topic of college, in the past few years, I've definitely noticed a resurgence in the debate between four-year institutions, whether it's worth it. A lot of people argue that, the cost and especially the situation for Jews right now in four-year university campuses, it's really not worth it. And some people will argue that it's not really a one-size-fits-all. Some people might be, good with their skills at a vocational or trade school. Some people might not need to go to college at all. However, some people still believe that four-year college is the premier path towards getting an education, getting a good job in your 20s. So how do you feel about this with your kind of unique perspective working with kids and, helping them apply for college and study for these tests? Do you think that it's one size fits all per se, or do you think that the stigma of like a four-year education has kind of gone a little too far?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the proverbs that I think about quite a bit, which I think I might have told you, I call it Solomon and synapses, right? It's connecting the brain science of learning to deep biblical knowledge. King Solomon very famously said in Proverbs, educate a child according to his nature, right? And so we've talked a little bit about what that might mean in terms of learning styles. I think that very much relates to what you said as well. I'll give you an example. There are some people who, a lot of my students who anticipate going to a particular four-year college, and then they spend a gap year somewhere. And whether it's spending time maybe in Israel, doing some learning or working, volunteering at a kibbutz or at a startup, or whether it's working in real life somewhere else, suddenly that real life experience shifts what they want to do. Another thing that I think about is the reality of campuses having different policies right now in terms of antisemitism and what that means for a student and the students' families. When we're thinking about tuition, one of the things we want to think about is, okay, I need to earn a certain amount of money from work study while I'm in university. If I feel that I'm also going to have to get some other support because there are some professors who maybe I'm a little bit less comfortable with, or I'm feeling that I need to have money to live in off-campus housing with people where I feel I'll be more comfortable and some anti-Zionism issues are not going to complicate our relationships. That's a reality both for the students and the families. So part of what I think about is what's the trajectory of the experience? Now, having said that, I think that a lot of the tools that we have now make a 4-year degree really wonderful for a lot of people. So to give you an example, I work with students who might be at an Ivy League university, and maybe the pace at which they process information and take notes is slower. And so they might realistically need to spend their summers taking some courses because it's hard to take a full course load, or they may need to take an extra semester. There are, again, practical, financial, and planning realities to that. On the other hand, AI can be a fabulous tool when you know how to use it. And so what I found, again, that's that metacognitive piece, that I have so many students that we work together when we figure out how to bring in source material, how to create prompts so that the students can absorb the information more efficiently or balance time while they're also doing an internship and a work study. And suddenly that 4-year degree is much more accessible to them.
So it's really about finding that balance between what you can do in your workload, how to manage that, and, like maximizing your educational and intellectual experience at these universities.
Indeed. And I guess one other thing I would say is, although the name for my silly group is Ivy Prep, and I'm very proud that I had attended some of them because I learned a tremendous amount. I had great mentorship. Often that happens at smaller universities. Mm-hmm. Often it's a smaller school where the professors, there's not as much of a wall of teaching assistants, or the professors live very close to campus.
Smaller class sizes as well.
Absolutely. And suddenly that helps the curriculum come to life. There are more opportunities as an undergrad to be involved in research with the professors. And that opens up doors that might not have been available at a school where there are 300 people in your intro to microeconomics course.
Yeah, I think that really at least helps me really determine where I want to go, because previously I really thought about going to kind of UCs. It's cheaper on the tuition. However, I think that's maybe one of the downfalls with the UC system. The schools, they have so many students that it's much harder to get such a tailored education that you can get maybe at some of the Ivies.
No, it's a reality. And I'll just throw out also an example of one school which has become of interest to a lot of Jewish families, especially in the past 4 or 5 years, is an example of a North Carolina school, which is really a fabulous program, a smaller one, where the students have much more access to professors, autonomy, and mentorship. So, and the students end up having a great experience, placing really well. So that really kind of goes back to what we were saying. You're using your college prep experience to better understand yourself and where you feel you're going to be able to thrive.
Just putting this issue into a more Jewish and perspective of anti-Semitism right now, students are, like you said, they're debating between these big public schools. I'm sure me and Rob, you're also having this dilemma, and these small private schools where there's a more tailored education, as you said. But there's also another factor for Jewish students. On the one hand, there's campuses like Columbia and Brown, and we talked about this with Shai Davidai in his podcast recently, because he worked at Columbia, and obviously he eventually exited because of the really disastrous policies of their management. So there's those campuses where there's real hostility towards Jewish students, and it's a very negative environment for Jewish students to thrive in. And then, so many families, because of this, are questioning whether Jewish kids should even apply to those universities. On the other hand, some Jewish students, like myself, like I also have this dilemma. I think that if Jewish students stop applying and stop going to these places like Columbia, it's almost like we're surrendering our space, and we're kind of rewarding this management and the anti-Semitism, saying, okay, you guys win, Jews won't come here anymore. So I also do think that Jews should always have a continuous presence in these campuses. How do you kind of counsel or work with your students and their parents especially to kind of navigate this tension? I'm sure a lot of parents are worried sending their kids off to these higher institutions that have a history now of very pervasive anti-Semitism. So I think it's a big dilemma to consider. And I was just wondering how you work with your students and that, how you reconcile that.
It's a great question. So first of all, I tend to start with people earlier on in their development. So in 9th, 10th grade, not to stress out the students, but to make it a gradual process so that we can really get to know each other. And frankly, also look at the trajectory of how schools are starting to respond to the situation. So one part is that in our really getting to know each other and see how those schools are shifting, or frankly, where things are getting worse, we're able to kind of problem solve together. Another part of it goes back to the idea of each individual person. And I think if we want to throw some Jewish thought into it, I think I mentioned to you that I often think about the work of Rabbi Salanter, who was the founder of the Musar movement. And Rabbi Salanter, this was in the 1800s, but his ideas really resonate. And they come to my mind thinking of somebody who's thinking about how people grow. Rabbi Salanter very famously encouraged the people who he inspired with the phrase, da et atzmecha, know yourself. And of course, we know that that's the Socrates said it, Rousseau said it as well, right? That it's that idea of self-awareness. So in students getting to know themselves, their parents, of course, it's your life. It's not your parents' life, but who's more invested than a parent, right? And my doing my job, we're able to kind of see that. We're also able to do little toe in the water experiments along the way. So for example, we might be able to see how a student feels comfortable taking the lead when there's something happening at their local high school, or in organizing. In New York, there's going to be a primary soon, coming up on the 23rd. So there were some students who are deciding to canvass and encourage people to register or to vote or to consider voting for particular candidates. And if the students are doing that and they may encounter people who think differently, they can kind of see how comfortable they are in their own skin. You know, gee, I had a different way of thinking about it with somebody, or maybe something nasty was said to me. But, you know, I was able to put it in perspective. And then when I needed to do my practice science section of the ACT, I was able to do that and bounce back. Or when I wrote an email to somebody about it, it took much longer than I expected, and I didn't get to that practice section. That's useful information, because those are like mini experiments in what real life will be like. The other thing I would say is that people grow over time. And so as an example, I see there are some people who I mentored when they were high school students, and they're now at Columbia, they're at Harvard. And because of their personal development, because of how they found community, sometimes because of gap year experiences, they bring a certain fortitude and comfort zone to what they're doing. So those are the things that I think about. Of course, there are also practical aspects about when you go on campus visits and in speaking with the campus reps. And those are things that we're thinking about, especially as we're thinking about some of the particular departments or undergraduate schools that you might be applying to. Because we know that in general, engineering schools tend not to have as much of a clash of viewpoints in the classroom as might happen in a history or in a sociology class.
Yeah, I think that's really important. And I think just the development of maybe teenagers going throughout their high school journey to maybe the college application process, it shows, I think, maybe, and as you might see, the just amount of change that one might have just through their day-to-day experiences. So I kind of also wanted to wonder, kind of maybe on the other hand, kind of like, how does the neuroscience of maybe teens and young adults affect their college application experience maybe?
To my mind, it's huge. One of the realities is that what we ask kids to do changes over time as they're in class, right? So in nursery school, if you remember back to those days, our job was to learn how to sit and share and wait our turn, right? Then until like third grade, people are really focused on teaching kids skills. How do I take this long word and break it into syllables? How do I remember my math facts? Starting middle school, 4th, 5th grade, there's a shift. My Professor Stoll very famously said, there's a shift from learning to read to reading to learn, right? So suddenly you've got textbooks or articles about the planets and about the French Revolution. And that happens over time. And partly that's because of the sections of the brain that are starting to develop and also not only grow more cells, but also grow certain tracts, certain pathways that send the messages more quickly through the nervous system. By the time people are your age, what's also happening is that their critical thinking skills, problem solving, and what we call associative learning, being able to connect those dots, really takes off. And because those early systems are more in place, they're able to be, I kind of call it being your own CEO. The official term is executive functions. So they have more for a feel about how to prioritize, right? I'm filming this podcast and I need to do a math section, right? It will take me 15 minutes to make sure that my high school teachers know that they have to write them recommendations this summer, and then I have to go mow the lawn, right? So the sense of how much time things take, also something we call task activation, getting started, and sustained attention, all of those are things that factor into the college process. Most important, I think, that students are also learning how to figure out what really matters to them, how to do what they need, but how to really spend time in relationships and areas that are critical or really add meaning to their lives. And that's why I say that the college process is not just about getting into a place. It's about developing those systems and that sense of yourself, because then you're more likely to end up at a school that you want to be at for 4 years.
Yeah, I think that's what you mentioned about the brain's this kind of phase where, we're developing these executive functions where we can balance all, like mowing the lawn, applying for colleges, doing the SAT. Me and Robbie both took AP psychology this past year, and it reminds me a lot about, the phases we learned about, the concrete operational stage and, these distinct stages that, I think Piaget theory, I might be wrong, but
you got it, my friend.
Start in the sensory motor, and then we keep developing. I think that's really interesting to kind of think about, and also put it in the context of myself and my own development, because once I kind of understand these processes and mechanisms, I can kind of see how I've progressed as a person and how I've improved and been able to understand higher concepts and balance more things in my life in the last couple of years that I probably wouldn't have been able to. Like I wouldn't have been able to manage doing a podcast, studying for the SAT, college applications, all this schoolwork when I was 13 or 14. But now I'm developed, grown more neurons and all of these really cool executive functions. And I think it's really cool to just put that on yourself and put your kind of own mind on that roadmap.
I totally agree with you. And hopefully the two of you have had a taste of things that matter to you. So not only have you learned these skills and figured out how to manage your time and whatnot, but you also see what you want to devote your time to, right? You may go, students who go to Columbia University, they call it the core curriculum, right? So there were certain requirements that you do need to fulfill, but that gives you a feel, do I want to be at Columbia or do I want to go to Brown where I really can dig into things that matter to me much more, and I don't have as many of those additional requirements. Hopefully that also gives you a sense of what life is going to be like beyond the classroom, because that's the best thing of all. You're getting more and more agency to do what's meaty for you, what gives you more gratification, and ultimately to chart your own course.
Yeah, I think this also connecting it to another kind of framework that we learned recently, Maslow's kind of hierarchy of needs. It's everyone kind of has to achieve self-actualization. You need to go through your path. You need to get all of your basic needs before you can eventually go up this hierarchy and eventually get, I think, the ultimate goal of what your purpose is. And kind of, however, transitioning from maybe more of the psychological perspective of this, how do you maybe think the Jewish perspective influences your thoughts on like maybe college applications and like future career paths?
Yeah, it very much does. In fact, I was thinking about it as you were talking about Dr. Maslow, because we also know that there's been a shift in what we need to prioritize right now, right? So it might have been that you were spending more time. I think you mentioned that you're a Giants fan, baseball-wise, right? You might have been spending more time on thinking about enjoying the Giants. And right now, you're devoting your time. I think you'd also told me, Mark, that you're involved with Z3, right? This moment in history is calling upon all of us to bring our distinct passions and capabilities to solve the problems that we face and to find ways to thrive despite it. The rabbi at my synagogue, Rabbi Chaim Steinmetz, has said the vacation from Jewish history is over. And on the one hand, that can be very tough to be growing up with that reality. On the other hand, it offers a tremendous opportunity to think about what's really important to you and to find a way to really make that happen. And quite honestly, I think that's also a situation in which folks your age and with, let's call that new stage of young adulthood, right? From the teens through the 20s, when we think about whether it's influencers or sports figures, so many people have found a way to step forward and also to shake it up a little bit with, to open the eyes of the more traditional older community to say, guys, you have to look at this differently, right? This doesn't resonate as much for us, or some of what you're doing, it's nice to put together a nice conference, but that's not translating to our experience on campus or our comfort when we go to do a school visit, when we see people who are standing in the way of our entering the Hillel or threatening us. We're not interested in a fancy brochure. We need to understand practically how you'll have our backs.
Yeah. You've told us also that, you're obviously a proud Jewish mother and you're an educator embedded within the most Jewish city in the United States. So I was just wondering, within this kind of area and your personal perspective, how did the events on October 7th and after October 7th impact you personally? How has your career changed, if at all, since then? And have you seen an uptick in anti-Semitic incidents around you, or have your students, experienced any events like this, or have they had any complaints?
I would say there's been a real variety. For me professionally, I work with people from a range of backgrounds. So I've had people who have flown in from Saudi Arabia. I've worked with people in Qatar. And if they're lovely people and we don't need to agree on anything and the focus is on growing, the focus isn't on my religious beliefs or political opinions, it's on the child, what to do to help, or sometimes it's an adult, right? If there's an adult executive, be from anywhere. So that continues to be my responsibility so that everybody can be comfortable. Having said that, there certainly have been some shifts. I'm involved with some groups of colleagues, and honestly, after October 7th, some people had posted some things that were not factually accurate. And initially, there was a tremendous outpouring of sympathy for some of the things that had been said, which weren't factually accurate. And I did respond in a non-aggressive way, but I did state my thoughts about what some of those facts were. And I noticed that some of those people had not reached out, for example, to Jewish colleagues or to Jewish children to check on how they were doing, and that surprised me. The truth is, I might have lost some referrals. Perhaps there are some people who do not want to work with me. Hopefully that won't be the case, and they'll know that my heart is really in the right place to help them. It might be. On the other hand, it's been an opportunity to grow and to connect with people where there's tremendous, where we're really simpatico. So as an example, when there were the Sunday marches in Central Park, each Sunday, until the hostages were all released, few months into it, it started getting cold in Manhattan, not like sunny California. And so I offered to the organizers from the hostage movement to bring coffee and hot cocoa and Dunkin' Donuts for the people who were there, because I felt that we wanted the children to know that when they were showing up, that we valued that and that they should be comfortable. So that's an example of where there was positive. Shall I give you another example, especially if we're talking college?
Yeah.
Okay, so you may know, in fact, these folks have been on Shai Davidai's podcast. You may be aware of Gesher Campus Care, which recently was started by two wonderful colleagues, Dr. Jessica Zmood and Dr. Shelley Steinwurzel, and they basically saw a gap. They felt that it was important to provide support for students on campus, as well as faculty or administrators who felt uncomfortable and felt that they were experiencing discrimination in the face of October 7th. And they founded a program that offers free or highly subsidized therapy and provide to these individuals, and also provides training to the therapists, and they screen the therapists so that they're sure that the therapists have signed on to the IRA definition of antisemitism, and that we can feel comfortable that if students need this support, that it will happen with people who will help manage the stress and not add to it. So that's been a tremendous boon.
It's amazing, yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just really impactful, and I love how you're just really helping. And I think the coffee and even just Dunkin' Donuts really probably made, I think, the protesters' day, and I think maybe contributed a lot more than you would think. I was also just wondering if maybe a Jewish teenager or kid maybe comes to you struggling, feeling unsafe or kind of othered at school, how would you approach that maybe?
So that's happened to me, and it was something that you asked at the start. It has happened. So there have been times that has happened around comfort. Say, for example, I'll often work with students who can be very bright, but they may need particular accommodations in order to manage their schoolwork, right? So it's not that they're trying to cheat or get an extra edge. They truly need it. And there's, of course, documentation, evidence to that. But if they're not comfortable approaching for example, they may have a flexible deadline. It may be that because they process information more slowly, that they have a little extra time to get final projects in because it's too condensed at the last minute. They've had TAs with whom they've felt uncomfortable, or that they knew that the TAs had posted things. So it was very important for us to kind of work on almost a script of how to keep it focused on what's really going on, and how to sort of document things and make sure to bring in professors or deans so that it wouldn't escalate. It frankly has also come up in terms of looking at certain school content and making sure that they're comfortable with certain courses or professors who may have certain readings in the curriculum. It's fine to read different things, right? To hear different perspectives. But if they see that the wording of the course description, or that the large focus of the readings is, a very, let's say, anti-colonial, or, Zionism is colonialism, then part of what we've done is considered, is this the best course to take right now? Maybe I want to wait and see. Maybe I want to take the course with a different professor. So there have definitely been realities that we've had to think about, whether it's considering schools to visit or being in the thick of it when there's a sense of discomfort.
Yeah, I think I personally I really saw that when I took a college course. I took international relationships, just a semester. Or an international relations, a semester back. And during the course, I had a discussion weekly, and one of my discussions kind of was on how does the Palestinian movement use social media, and all the sources that he gave us were kind of for that movement. And it was really difficult to try and embed my perspective into my response, while also not wanting to potentially risk my grade or get a 0 on the discussion. And I think that also really happened as well in the midterm and final, where we got to pick a conflict of our choice. And I wanted to really do the Israel and Palestine conflict, as I think
Yes.
it really resonated with me. And it was
Yes.
just trying to be able to read that it might affect my grade or it might affect what happens with me in the class.
Yeah, it can be tricky. And of course, it's good to have a network of, investment or people you know to kind of hear their perspectives also. And it's a balancing act because we do want to try to immerse ourselves in certain opportunities and have an open mind. But if we see that's happening, it really can be quite difficult. And so part of that comes back to that idea of knowing yourself. I don't know how you feel, Robbie. I don't know if you're having had that experience gives you a sense, and don't feel you have to respond. It's more rhetorical, right? You might have a sense of, I kind of feel like I know how to navigate that now. Here's who I would go speak with. I would take the course for the first week. Once I saw the syllabus and heard the tone of the professor, I would see what my comfort zone was, or if it was better to just wait this one out, or, you know what, this is something where I have to take a stronger stand.
I'm wondering if you think in these types of scenarios, I mean, obviously it depends on the scope and the magnitude of the class or whatnot, but, when there's such curriculum, when there's a class with such anti-Zionist or this new kind of left and imperialist, colonialist framework.
Yes.
Whether the best course of action, some might say that Jews, they should kind of ignore it, not make attention to themselves in the hopes that, not in the hopes, but them thinking that creating a disturbance or filing complaint will actually bring negative attention to the issue and make it worse. And then there's the other side where we should be, strong Jews. And if we see something, we should coalitionize and act. Like, for example, our school district right now is getting sued for anti-Semitism because of ethnic studies curriculum and the anti-Israel and anti-Semitic bias kind of within that class. So I was just wondering is it like a pick your battle situation, or when do you find the right balance to really strike down on, anti-Western or anti-Israeli sentiment versus when should you, let some slide and just take what you can?
Yeah. I tend to take, for myself, more of a loud and proud approach, not to be antagonistic. And sometimes it's a matter of nodding your head and moving on. I gave you the example of an experience I had with colleagues. And I do think that has impacted some people's decisions to work with me. Again, I wasn't nasty, but I just kind of wasn't going to sit there and let it fly, And I've described to you how, for me, I was able to find that balance. And I've also found places in my life to create more of a reinforcement, give me a sense of sturdiness for when those situations might come up. Because I work with people where usually it's either they're super on top of it and they know this is a really important thing to do. It's going to really pay off if I work with Rebecca and figure this out. Sometimes it's because they're having a tough time or they really have particular requirements that would help them. So I really am thinking about that as well. I'll give you an example. Let's say a person could have very, very strong feelings and be prone to panic attacks, or have a sleep cycle disruption, or have ADD and have a lot of difficulty organizing their ideas, or if they get tired, they get burnt out. So in that situation, I'm really trying to think with the student and also with the parents about how they can respond to the experience, which is so important, while appreciating these other factors too. If there's a kid who has OCD, right? There's a high incidence of OCD in the Jewish community, especially among Ashkenazim, right? If a person has OCD and they have to spend a lot of time on managing certain thought processes or certain behaviors that can interfere, and they're on work study, or they know that their parents took out a loan in order to send them to this program, I'm not saying what they should do, but I want to appreciate, I don't want to be encouraging them to, stand firm on one thing that's going to work to their detriment in other ways.
Yeah.
So that's how I think about it. But I do believe that standing up for oneself, having depth of knowledge, right? Knowing the information, knowing where your policy and your community is so that you're around other people who can truly be supports is so essential.
Yeah, just because we had an episode with Shai like just the day before, it really resonates with me. And I think he said a lot of the same things you're saying. Sometimes you have to put aside your maybe professional goals and values to go more for your ethical goals and values. Shai as well, he kind of sidetracked his whole career to advocate for what he believed in. That was just so inspirational to see how you're able to kind of throw away your original plan to just go with what you believe in. And I think that also is what I saw with Stand With Us, and in the recent ethnic studies lawsuit at our school, it showed kind of how a lot of the students were able to actually risk all the hate they might get and all the antisemitism they would receive in the course and kind of just speak out.
That's for sure. And the other thing is, thinking about college, there are so many more options now. So for example, there are gap year programs where students can get credits if they're not so sure and they want to monitor what's happening on campus. They may opt to defer for a year, kind of see what's happening, be in a program where they can accrue some credits that way. There are people who are in Israel, whether it's at Reichman University, it used to be called IDC, or at other programs where they're taking other classes, working at high-tech companies, right? In Israel, they call it high tech, and finding ways to kind of navigate this if they feel that it's not the moment that they want to deal with it. And then there are people who, as you said, are really ready to step up. Can I tell you a little anecdote about that?
Of course.
Yeah.
So there's a young man whose parents very proudly told me this story, that he's at an Ivy League school, and at last year, when there were some students who had been admitted and they were coming to the school for a brunch at their Hillel house, there were a bunch of people outside who were saying very unpleasant things, pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel, and they were looking a little foreboding. And, often there are a few people who are really, really into it, and other people kind of come along, they're encouraged, and they don't necessarily know as much.
Antagonize.
So this young man has a good sense of humor and a good head on his shoulders. He actually went outside to the group, to some people he knew were a little less intense, and he said to them, listen, we just had this program here. It's about another half hour. Can you guys keep it down for a little bit? We've got a really great brunch with lots of leftovers, and we're bringing them to you if you just give us half an hour. So he really used humor and just knowing,
That's
what
amazing.
college care about. Have a great Sunday brunch, and he brought them the bagels and lox.
That's a men for sure.
Yeah. Men, as you are.
There we go. Okay, last couple questions, I promise. We know you're busy, but
It's all good.
so of course you're a very distinguished guest. You have very impressive background, and you have such a unique role within your community, within the community of educators in the Jewish community. Do you have any goals for the future? What is maybe the legacy that you're working towards?
That's really a fabulous question. Well, one of the things that I'm doing is looking at AI, because it's really a fabulous tool. And I don't know if you've seen this in your experience. My experience is that the difference just in the past year between how AI is being used in education and the workplace already speaks to enormous opportunity, enormous sophistication. So that's an area that I feel is just, it's essential. There were naysayers who felt that people would just use it to cut corners. And there may be people who do that, but I feel that the potential is enormous. And I'm actually involved with some folks who are looking at ways to incorporate AI into assessment to make it a more integrated process. So that's very exciting to me. One of the other things that I'm really focused on is trying to engage with schools where there's an opportunity so that they continue, I guess to your point, Mark, so that they see we're not backing down, but we're also not looking to be confrontational. So as an example, I think that there's a wonderful opportunity for certain universities to encourage their schools of education to develop Jewish information resource sites and for them to be teaching about how to teach about anti-Semitism. So I'm in touch with some of the schools I've been involved with, and I'm not ready to just look the other way because this professor or the other one says things that are uncomfortable. I'd rather encourage them to help them grow because I think that their mission overall is positive, and to say, everybody has their pet project. You're educators. So maybe this is a great time for you to take the lead and put together a seminar for educators at large about how to teach about the Middle East in a more balanced way. So those are some of the areas. And the last thing is that the world is so complex these days. And so look, you are people who love your Judaism, you're thinking about media, you're also, you told me, learning certain technologies so that you can edit your podcast. I feel that it's so important for us to have ways to connect the dots. And I don't know if you've seen this with your friends. Often they'll feel like, I'm going to this teacher for this thing, and I'm going to that person for the other thing. And, this is stressful, and I'm being sent, encouraged to go to somebody else to learn stress management techniques. And I feel that part of our job is to find ways to help people feel a sense of agency so that they can figure out how to get what they need from their teachers and from mental health. And I think that it's a very exciting time to try to move from these sort of siloed or islands of expertise to helping people understand more about the connections so that they can take charge with what they feel really resonates for them.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's great. I've been learning a lot. I appreciate it. I think it's a big point, and I really appreciate your standing within the Jewish community and your goals of making these resources for Jewish students possible. And I think that's a really critical goal that the Jewish community can strive towards, of leveraging AI and leveraging all these new opportunities to create more safer, more balanced, and equitable Jewish communities and safe spaces within college campuses, even workplaces. So I think that's a very commendable goal of yours. You want to do the last question?
To wrap it up, we just wanted to ask, if you could leave the audience with just one piece of advice, what would you like to tell them?
Jewish teenagers.
Yeah.
First of all, be Mensches like Robbie and Mark. Figure out what matters to you. Take the risk. Shai Davidai saw something in the two of you, right? The ISC, they saw something in you, in your intelligence, your sincerity, your willingness to do something that isn't being done. So that's the most important part. And the other part is we're all growing. So the important thing is to keep growing, learning, connecting with people. And I would also just say, we would never want a person to be in a dangerous situation. And I don't want people to have a hurtful situation. You were describing how tough it was in that class. But there's also tremendous opportunity in there. And I think that in the past few years, especially, the more mature generation is recognizing that we need to keep looking toward the younger people to see their experience, what matters, and to use their input so that we can mentor them. But after all, they're the ones who are setting the pace. And again, another publication, another conference, that's important. What's most important is for the two of you and your peers to feel that there are people who have your back and are going to keep encouraging you to go from strength to strength.
Okay. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on. We really appreciated your time.
I know I learned a lot, and I'm sure our audience did too. And I look forward to, speaking with you again, hopefully sometime soon, and seeing the impact that your work has on the future. So thank you for being here.
It's my pleasure. You've already impacted me, and I'm looking forward to our staying in touch.